Hello, welcome to our webinar. Thank you all for joining us. We're really delighted that we've had so many folks register for this webinar. Welcome. This is part two of our skills-based hiring webinar series with the National Governors Association. My name is Josh Wright, and I'm honored to moderate this interactive Q&A today. As we get started, before introductions, I've just got a few logistical notes. First, if you have a comment or want to connect with your peers who are here today joining us, you can use the chat feature here on this Vimeo webinar. If you have a question for the presenter, and we will be taking questions throughout some real-time live Q&A, you can submit your question in the Q&A section of the webinar platform. The recording is in progress right now. We will be sending out a copy of the recording and the slide deck if for those who were not able to join us live. With those housekeeping notes out of the way, one other quick note. If there's a polling section here that you'll see in the platform as well, and if you can click on that, and if you would like to learn how Lightcast can help you apply a skills-based approach, whether you're an organization, an institution, for your region, you can, at any time during the webinar, you can click on that section and we'll get your information that way. So I'm delighted today to introduce our lineup of speakers. We are joined by three experts in the skills-based hiring and skills intelligence space. And we're also doing this in partnership with National Governors Association. Really delighted about that partnership as well. So first, Amanda Winters joined us for part one. She is Program Director of Post-Secondary Education at NGA. Her colleague, Satish Gaib, is with us as well. Thank you, Satish, for joining us. She's a project manager for the Skills First initiatives, and Satish will be giving a run-through of NGA's Skills in the States initiative here in a second. I'm also excited to be joined by my colleague, Matt Walsh. He's our research director here at Lightcast, does a lot of our awesome cutting edge research and professional services work. Matt was with Amanda on our part one conversation, and so he will be answering some of the questions and being part of this dialogue today as well. My name is Josh Wright. As I mentioned, I'm head of growth here at Lightcast, and have been privileged as well to be behind the scenes and part of our partnership with NGA, and particularly as we rolled out our first report on empowering progress, harnessing the power of skills-based hiring and the strategies and metrics to analyze skills-based hiring. And we talked about that in part one, if you want to go back to that. So just a quick view of what we're going to be covering today. As I mentioned, this is part two of our webinar series, and the response, I just want to set some context. The response and interest from part one was so tremendous and sparked so many questions that we've decided to schedule this time to go deeper. The goal of this session is to have a real practical conversation about skills-based hiring, specifically for those in higher education and the public sector. We had over 600 people register for this webinar, which was an awesome response. And we have so many questions that we've fielded. We aren't going to be able to get to all of them for obvious time reasons, but we have chosen some of those by specific themes that we'll cover. And then we'll also be fielding and lacing in live real-time questions as well throughout this conversation. The shift to skills-based hiring, as we talked about in part one, it is both gotten a lot of attention and buzz, and also maybe sounds simple and straightforward, but the reality is way more complex. Amanda and Matt covered in part one just how skills-based hiring is a really big umbrella term. It covers everything from alternative pathways to different types of technology adoption. It also lacks a standard definition and measurements of success. And not surprisingly, because of some of those challenges, progress has been uneven. There's been some really good advances and some other research that has shown that skills-based hiring has been struggle to get off the ground. So we've oriented this conversation around some of those key themes to just push this conversation around skills-based hiring into the corners. Most of our time today will be the interactive Q&A, and then we'll end this session talking about some of the supporting research that we have already put out there in the field, and more things to be coming as well. Just a quick word about Lightcast for those who are not familiar, and then I'm going to hand it over to Satish to talk about NGA. Lightcast is the global leader in labor market analytics. Through our software products, our data, our consulting services, we help businesses, communities, and educational institutions answer really pressing labor market questions, understand how to unlock new possibilities in the labor market. And that is our mission. That's what we've been doing for over 25 years as our legacy companies, MZ and Burning Glass, came together a couple of years ago to form Lightcast. So we're really honored to be part of this. It's a really important conversation, and excited to be convening this today. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Satish.
Well, thanks, Josh, and good afternoon, everybody. It's great to be joined with all of you in this conversation today. I'm going to just take a few minutes to provide a quick overview of some of the work that we've been focused on at NGA and the Center for Best Practices, and then I'll share a few just quick key insights from our Empowering Progress report to just kind of frame us, and then I'll hand things back over to Josh to get the Q&A started. So for the last year and a half, I've had the privilege of leading our Skills in the States initiative alongside Amanda Winters, who's on our call today as well. And this initiative brought together a community of practice with 24 states and territories, catalyzed really by the growing wave of governors prioritizing skills-based hiring and the removal of bachelor degree requirements when possible from many public sector roles. And we convened this group primarily of state HR leaders to tackle the big picture questions around implementing skills first strategies. And together we shared emerging best practices, we identified those common barriers, and fostered peer-to-peer learning across a diverse range of topics and states and territories as well. And so you can see all of those participating in purple on the map. And with such a, you can see this covers, half the country. And with such a large cohort, we have seen a wide spectrum of progress. Some states that joined us were already early adopters of skills-based practices, and others were just beginning that journey. And that diversity is a strength, and our work has blended strategic vision with also hands-on technical assistance focused on key points across the entire talent lifecycle. So it's not just focused on skills-based hiring or removing degree requirements from classifications. And one of the biggest takeaways that, and Josh alluded to this earlier from our work, is that there's no one-size-fits-all approach to this, and states and territories are adopting skills-based practices in ways that reflect their unique needs and strategic goals and policies that they've issued, which is great, but also adds a layer of complexity when we think about what success looks like and overall impact of the public sector shift to skills-based approaches. And typically when it comes to implementation, we often start with a critical question of what do we measure? How do we measure success, and what does that look like? And because each state is approaching this work differently, it's hard to compare apples to apples. And so that challenge and wanting to celebrate early wins while also finding a way to communicate progress across different states and territories in a meaningful and consistent way is what led us to our Empowering Progress report, which we wrote in collaboration with Lightcast. And this report is designed to elevate the data and metrics needed to assess how the public sector is implementing skills-based strategies, not just in hiring, but really across the entire talent management lifecycle. And so together with our state and territory teams and our National Skills Advisory Council and Lightcast, we conducted a comprehensive landscape scan of public sector's skills first efforts to date. And again, our goal in doing that was to surface those executive level insights and propose a shared set of metrics to track impact both now and over time. Because we do have a lot of success that we've seen so far, but really being able to communicate that was crucial. And so we were intentional also about building a metrics framework that looks beyond surface level indicators like the number of job postings without a degree requirement. Because while those are important signals, we're also focused on the deeper, longer term outcomes, like how this is shifting how we recruit and evaluate and assess and hire and advance and retain talent as well. And so a couple of quick key findings from that report. And if you haven't had a chance to read it, I highly recommend that you do. But To date, 27 states and territories have adopted policies encouraging skills-based hiring, including eliminating bachelor degree requirements from many roles. And we are seeing a higher share of job postings without degree requirements in those states than in states without such policies. And these policies are helping states address talent shortages, diversify their workforce, and improve hiring outcomes. And states that adopt skills-based hiring and talent management strategies have enhanced their workforce mobility. They've facilitated improved matching of talent to open roles, and they've also decreased some of the long-term vacancies that they've had by opening up the candidate pool to a broader talent market. And we still have challenges, including the need for robust data collection and strategies to assess and validate skills, as well as capacity and adequate funding to support this shift in talent management and skills initiatives in general. And so, I'll note that this report marks our first step in tracking the impact and the ROI of these policies and practice changes. But over the next year, we'll continue refining it in close collaboration with our partners and our state and territory teams to ensure it reflects both the progress that we've made and the potential that lies ahead. So, with that, I will hand things back over to Josh for the Q&A.
Thank you, Satish. That was a great summary, very helpful as we orient the conversation here. And we're already getting, I see some questions filtering in, so thank you for that. Again, we're overwhelmed with a number of questions, just really tremendous. And so we're excited to dive into those. We are going to do this around some key themes, and really some of those themes are structured by the sector. This is the skills-based movement touches higher education, it touches the private sector, it touches the public sector. Lightcast and NGA work across those sectors. A lot of you in your roles and your organizations do as well. So we're going to try to orient this conversation around, go deeper into those specific sectors and how they can also work across sector to move to advance skills-based hiring as well. The first questions are around the role of education and skills. And there was already one question, Amanda. I'm going to tee this up to you to start here. There is a lot of question around what is the role of higher education if skills-based hiring is really about removing degree requirements from job descriptions. And obviously it encompasses much more than that. But there was one question in the chat already about and I think it summarizes it well, in addition to what we have here up on the slide. And that is, Jeffrey asked, do you worry that much of the discussion around skills-based is automatically aligned to degree versus not? Would we see more progress on the acceptance of skills-based if we make it independent of the degree debate? And I think that's actually a really nice teeing up for these questions we have on the screen too, of the opportunities for higher education, the challenges, and what you're already seeing either in the data or out there in the community of practice about how colleges are adapting their programs and classes. Looks like you're on mute, Amanda. Looks like can others hear Amanda? I don't believe we are able to. Amanda may have to we had a technical issue before the webinar where we may have to log out and rejoin. While Amanda does that, and apologies everyone, I'm going to hand that over to Satish and Matt to talk about, take this over just for a second about where you all see the role, what role does higher education play in this movement? Satish, do you want to take that first?
Yeah, I can kick it off and then hand it over to Matt as well. Higher education absolutely plays a critical role in the skills movement. And, we have been seeing a lot of shifts, especially in the community and technical college system, where many of those pathways and programs are credentialing as you go. And so being able to allow their students and learners to have a credential. It could be a non-credit credential or non-degree credential or a micro credential embedded into that program, so that if for some reason a degree program wasn't able to be completed, it's not a complete loss. They're able to take that knowledge and skills with them and to be able to showcase that in future employment opportunities as well. And so that's been a big shift that I have seen in higher ed as we adapt, but also really just thinking through like what are those fundamental foundational skills needed for success in the job market, and how are those being infused into the content and course curriculum. And that's been another big discussion in higher ed. But if Amanda has her sound back on, I'd be happy to kick it back over to her for her thoughts. Maybe not.
I'd be happy to build on what Satish had mentioned.
Go for it.
I think that you brought up a great sort of point, which is to shift the mentality from this kind of binary of credential acquisition, kind of post-credential acquisition or pre-credential acquisition, and to instead kind of treat education as this continuous learning experience where you gain and acquire skills that are going to be relevant in the sort of lifelong learning as well as in the labor market. And at some point you earn a credential that validates those skills, but you are earning skills that you're sort of earning and learning the entire time. I think there are other ways that the post-secondary system can be incredibly transformative in this move towards a skill-based talent acquisition, talent management strategy, which is that post-secondary institutions are primary conveners for education and career development already. And so having post-secondary institutions kind of continue to command that space, even as we focus more on that continuous skill acquisition rather than the kind of binary degree earning or not earning. I think that post-secondary institutions can play a huge role in being those conveners and being part of the conversation. I also think that post-secondary institutions can be really helpful as folks in the labor market try to figure out ways to validate skill acquisition. This is something that will come up on a sort of future slide here, which is how do we really validate skills if we've been relying on degrees to do that? The post-secondary system has all sorts of tools at their disposal to understand and evaluate a learner's skills in a certain domain area. A lot of that can kind of be handed off. There can be this sort of knowledge transfer from how that works in the post-secondary system to how it might work in the labor market, and how could employers kind of use some of these same tools that the post-secondary institutions are already so familiar with when it comes to validating skill acquisition. So I think there's actually a huge role for collaboration.
Those are great insights. So we are working on getting Amanda back, and one further technical difficulty perhaps is my internet looks a little shaky here at our headquarters, so hopefully we're okay. If not, apologies for all the technical glitches, but we're going to forge ahead. So that's that. There's a lot of questions and a lot more discussion we could have specific to higher education. And at Lightcast, I just want to mention as well, we work with over 1,000 colleges and universities, helping many of them right now think through these things. So if you have questions, our team would love to talk through this, how we're helping right now, the type of products and services we're not just the types of products and services, but also any kind of advising or any sense of how to adapt to this moment right now. I think one of the things that we see, and some of the research that we're going to highlight later, is there's so much change in the landscape of skills. We talked about this in the first webinar in our speed of skill change report, that it's requiring a level of agility and movement and speed. The pace of change is definitely quickened. So that's something that is to keep in mind as well, and how higher ed needs to adapt to this moment, and every sector does as well. So the next question we have, the next set of questions we have is around public sector adoption. And Satish, I'm going to hand this over to you, because I think this first question really touches on what you are also touching. We mentioned 25 states have already already moved forward here. There's a lot of questions we're talking about is what are we seeing in the kind of a broad adoption in the public sector? Which states have embraced it? What are you seeing as some of the limiting factors in other states or other regions not adopting it? And where does it need to move from here?
Yeah, I think the map that I had pulled up previously shows is a good visual for the states that are adopting. But there are other states that weren't on that map that are adopting it as well. And so, as of today, there are 27 states and territories with specific legislation, but also quite a few in our community of practice do not have specific policy or executive orders just yet for either skills-based practice adoption or the removal of certain four-year degree requirements from roles where possible. And it's because they're exploring. There's a recognition that there is a talent crisis, a talent shortage, and that's hitting the public sector and private sector. But the public sector has some of its own unique challenges when it comes to talent acquisition and retention. And so really skills-based approaches are one crucial strategy to reduce the barriers to entry and to be able to broaden that talent pool and pipeline for individuals that are skilled and qualified but maybe have been historically overlooked. So there are many that are exploring that right now that do not have existing like policy or executive orders to officially do this, but they're building towards that. And then we have 27 officially that have some kind of policy or executive order to support that. And I would say, there's a variety because there's no common definition when it comes to skills first hiring or skills based practices, and it's kind of squishy. And so when we think about some of the limiting factors to adoption, it really is because it means a lot of things to a lot of different people. And so what do we mean by that? And getting clear, especially at a state or territory level, like what are we trying to accomplish? What problem are we trying to solve as we shift to skills? What are our overarching strategies? And then aligning the work to that and getting clear on what those goals are, and then resourcing that, ensuring that as you make this shift, there is appropriate capacity and resources to support that shift. And so that is one of the more limiting factors to adoption of skills-based hiring or skills-based practices in general, is that it's a big lift. There's a lot to do, and states as an employer, they represent thousands of job classifications. And so just rewriting classifications with skills language and competency language rather than number of years of a specific experience or a specific job title or a degree requirement, that's a heavy lift in and of itself. And then when you think about how that translates into sourcing and recruiting and hiring and skill validation and assessment, career pathway advancement, that's a heavy lift. And so this is a long road, a long journey. And so just keeping that ROI and the value proposition and the reason that we're doing this top of mind, and then ensuring that there's sufficient capacity and resources to support it is crucial. And where I've seen it stall is in those areas where it's not appropriately resourced.
Very helpful. Matt, anything to add there, particularly maybe in some of that layering in the research that you led on that was in the NGA Lightcast report around, what signals you're seeing and how states have embraced this?
Just to underscore that the policy changes that Satiz mentioned really do have an impact, right? We see as we track these job postings on the Lightcast side, and we measure how often degrees are required, how often degrees are referenced. We see that following these changes in policy at the state level, you do see a market effect. Our research has shown that. Other researchers have demonstrated the same thing. And so these are really kind of labor market shifting policy decisions that get made when you consider how large these state employers are. When the state of Maryland or Colorado says, let's reevaluate all of what we're hiring for, and the way that we have job descriptions internally as well to open up those pathways, that's tens of thousands of individual employees that are affected, and then tens of thousands of job seekers that all of a sudden become eligible for a role because of a couple subtle changes in the language of a job posting. So just to show that, like, on the research side, we do see these effects playing out.
Great, thank you so much. So the next set of questions is around getting buy-in from the public sector and also the benefits of the public sector. So I think the audience here, for the most part, work in public sector agencies, higher education institutions. They both of those groups obviously work with the private sector a lot to serve their constituents, provide in-demand training, and connect them to connect employers to skilled talent. But I think there's a lot of question of what are we seeing in the private sector. And I know, Satish, some of the next tranche of work you all are going to be doing at NGA is really bringing together the public sector and the private sector and some of the research and best practices. Amanda mentioned that in part one. But since Amanda's not here, I'm going to, unfortunately, still having continued difficulty. So I think we're going to go with this group from now on. We miss you, Amanda. Thank you for joining us at the beginning. Satish, I'm wondering if you want to take the first stab at some of these questions. And that is, some of these questions are really specifically of, like, what are we seeing from, what HR, how they are already adapting job descriptions, turning into competency-based search language, what's working, if it's not working, why, and how do public sector agencies and higher education institutions help encourage their private sector constituents to take a skills-based practices?
Yeah, happy to dig into this. It's been a wide variety of what HR leaders have done when it comes to recrafting these descriptions. Many have really taken the approach where they are taking a look and saying, okay, historically we have required, this degree or this specific certification or X number of years of experience in this field. And they're really fundamentally reevaluating alongside those hiring managers, alongside the employees that are currently in those roles, and saying, what today and then into the near term future, what are the actual skills that are required to be successful in this role? Because we know, through skill turnover and just the sheer speed that skills are evolving and changing, that's really, whether you take an official skills-based approach or not, that's really, it's the future. It's what we're going to have to do to hire effectively. And so we're seeing those shifts, really outlining what are the competencies necessary, and really just opening up the variety of pathways that you can have, that you've taken to acquire those skills. And so those early adopters that are doing it well, that's the approach that they're taking. I think early on in this shift, we did see some, degree removals, but it was replaced with equivalencies, right? So, in lieu of a formal degree, we'll take 2 to 4 years of experience, direct work experience in. And that's a baby step, but it's certainly not the full step, because it doesn't really get to what are the actual skill sets, regardless of where they were acquired, that would lead to success in this role. And so, that's what I'm seeing among those that are doing this well. And that's happening both in the public and in the private sector. So the private sector, especially on a large scale, large organizations have taken this shift as well. And recrafting those descriptions, and also really thinking about what are the multiple pathways we haven't sourced from, that we can source from now that we are hiring for skills. How do we create better pathways into our K-12, into post-secondary, into our workforce systems to access a skilled talent pipeline that we haven't before? And Matt, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, I can add a couple of insights from the research side. One kind of heartening bit of data that came out of the kind of COVID pandemic era and immediately after labor market was that in instances of supreme kind of talent shortage and demand for certain roles really kind of overwhelming the available supply, we saw that employers did shift their hiring practices and began to really remove a lot of degrees or extraneous skills and really pare down to what the most necessary competencies were for the role, hire for those as a way to kind of broaden the talent pool. And as the labor market kind of regularized in the following years, we saw some of those degree requirements come back, but it is lower in the private sector than it was pre-COVID. So there has been some lasting effect in the kind of skills-based hiring practices. Another promising bit of evidence is around how employees who are hired under these skill-based precedents perform internally. How often do they get promoted? Do they stick around as long? Do they really help with retention? And the answer in our research suggests that yes, they get promoted at similar rates to peers. They stick around, in fact, longer, so they assist with retention. And so you have all of these proof points when you're building consensus internally, especially at like a large business or a medium-sized business, where you really need to build a consensus around a new approach to talent acquisition and talent management. When I talk to folks who are themselves speaking with HR leaders, they really emphasize the effects on retention and on engagement of the workers, right? Where if every role is kind of carefully crafted around skills, it makes career pathways much more obvious, and it makes it clear what you need to do to move between jobs much more obvious. When I talk to folks who are engaging with the C-suite, they really emphasize kind of the return on investment and the adaptability of their human capital when they have a really detailed and granular understanding of where that human capital can be deployed across the business. And I think taking that skills-based talent management approach opens up that ability to redeploy your workers in the most effective way and to kind of have that agility. So those are, I think, kind of proof points that are relevant for the private sector, especially those sort of medium-sized businesses and large businesses.
Thank you, Matt and Satis. And it looks like we have Amanda back. So Amanda, want to test your audio?
Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Oh my gosh, I'm so glad to be back with you guys. I felt I was desperate to answer some of those questions, and so sad that I had to mess with technology for 15 minutes before I could jump back in. But thank you. I think this is actually a good bridge. If you don't mind, I'd love to just throw in a call back to the previous questions around education and then tie it into this the private sector conversation. I really think we've certainly seen from the state perspective that we have two separate conversations going on. We have conversations around skills-based hiring, those types of strategies that to open the aperture for opportunity. But then we also have education and workforce pathway conversations that are happening at the same time. They are not happening in the same rooms. So the people who are planning for what they would argue, and I agree, are very skills-focused, industry-connected pathways are not in the same rooms with the hiring conversations of how we're moving people into these jobs, how we're thinking about retention. So I think we're very interested in, especially exploring, as everybody knows, there's been an explosion of credentials over the last decade or so. How do they play into some of these hiring decisions? Some of these credentials, very specific skill sets that they are validating, and they're trying to move people into specific sectors for specific types of roles. They've been created in alignment with industry needs. How are these different types of proxies that are not the bachelor's degree, how are they also signaling skills to employers? So we want to sort of explore the space that exists between a purely skills conversation and how we validate skills, and then the proxy that is the bachelor's degree. We have a lot of space that states have invested in that middle area that we want to better understand. Are these good signals for skills? Do employers care about these? Do people that earn these credentials do well in the industry or in the marketplace because of the skills they learned in these pathways? I think a lot of times there's a language connection too. We have the workforce side talking about skills. And we have the higher ed side talking about learning outcomes and competencies. And there's a bridge between those conversations that needs to be built. So I think a lot of work is happening on both sides, sort of this like really tactical hiring strategies, pathways into jobs. But then on the other side, how are we thinking about skills within career and tech ed and shorter term pathways and pathways to a degree? And I think as we're thinking about this too, the role of higher ed really is to think about learning that exists in different spaces and make sure that through the work that they do, all of this learning that may be gained and skills that may be gained for learners and workers in these different spaces can help propel them forward in educational pathways if they so choose. If they say, I want to get a bachelor's degree, I've gained lots of skills. Okay, let's figure out how to maximize a recognition of your skills within our pathways so that your learning is more portable and has impact in some different spaces. And it's not just, I was in this job and I learned something very specific to this job. And now I have to move to a different job and there's no way for me to take that learning and validate it and show it to another employer and say, I'm good. I want to move up. I want to get on a management track. Maybe I want to go earn a degree. So leaving all those options open. And the last thing I'll throw in there is I think higher ed has a great opportunity to increase agency within learners and workers and talking about their skills. Because a lot of this, until we have better technology that sort of ingests information about skills and badges and all the different things that we're creating on the higher ed side, the like translation of the skills is through interviews. It's through resumes. It's through how am I signaling to that employer that I have these skills that sit outside of a traditional degree, perhaps, but I want to signal to my employer. And that isn't just through sitting in a classroom. It isn't through just some very basic interaction. It isn't even through a data dashboard that we provide. It's really through intentional increasing of agency in our conversations with students and really saying, not only did you learn all this stuff, but let's talk about the skills that were being strengthened and that surround this so that you have a better understanding of what you're bringing to the table in the way of skills. And it's not just, I earned this thing, this badge, but instead I can tell you what this badge is, what it meant to me and my learning, and how it contributes to my preparation for this job or for advancement. So I think there's a really good crossover there. And thinking about the private sector, if we can build that bridge more intentionally between what we're trying to do on the education and workforce side and what industry is looking for, so we can figure out how to better signal skill development, how to better move people into those opportunities through a centering of skills rather than a degree. Even though I think Jeffrey's point in the chat around sort of separating the two, really hard to separate the two conversations because degrees have for a very long time been a proxy for advanced skill development and preparation for management and things of that nature. So we really have to think alongside a degree conversation. And also skills-based hiring doesn't mean you don't hire the person with the degree. So it's really a combined conversation that we need to figure out how to parse. Public sector is trying to do that, as Satis has outlined in some of the things that she's gone over with what our states are working on. But it's an ongoing challenge to think about, what the language looks like for industry and for educators as we try to connect these two sides. So I'm so glad I got to jump in with all this jumble of thoughts that I had about some of these first questions.
So glad to have you back. That was awesome. You covered a lot. You threaded a lot of the conversation already. And before we move to the last section of tranche of questions, I'm wondering if I just throw this open to any of you. There's some where we're seeing at Lightcast, and we're helping a lot of large Fortune 500 companies think through how to transform their strategic workforce planning and HR practices to a skills-based approach. We're doing quite a bit of that work, and very honored to work with a lot of the large organizations in that. And so when we say, I think there are some in the private sector say, hey, we're leading this already. And then we also are seeing all of these governors be some of the first to adopt, sign executive orders, adopt this. And so I wonder, and maybe we don't spend too much, we don't have to park on this too long, but how much can the private sector learn from the public sector and vice versa? And how do these, and should it be a demand-driven private sector led, like, does it need to be led by the private sector? Say, these are the skills we need, like, especially on the education and workforce side, to your point, Amanda, like, here are the skills we need, and how are you going to adapt to make sure that we have a capable workforce?
I will jump in, but I'd love Satis's perspective from the cohort side as well. I think we always want to see governors leading and states leading. So that's, of course, where we lean in. And then also, I think one of the things we're trying to do in our project is sort of center the public sector as another huge employer. So while we have the bifurcation of public and private sector, they're all employers at the end of the day. They need talent. So when we're thinking about industry partnerships, the public sector needs to be seen as an industry for education and workforce to partner with. And they have needs, very specific sometimes that mirror their private sector counterparts. So I think we're looking at the next phase of our work to sort of join together those conversations, to share best practices, because I think there's stuff to learn on either side. But Satis, if you want to talk for just a moment about sort of that connection that we're planning on making.
Yeah, exactly. And I think there has been a ton of interest just in the work that we've done with states and territories. They want to learn from their private sector counterparts. They want to know what the leading industries in their states or surrounding states have been doing in this space. And so in the private sector is also leaning into what states are doing and how they're implementing as an employer. And there's so much overlap when it comes to the types of careers and roles and skills that are required in both public and private as an employer. And so getting this group together and aligning on, like, where are we heading? What are going to be those fundamental foundational skills that we all need to successfully recruit for in the coming years? And how can we ensure that we're informing workforce and education to ensure that the programs being developed or expanded are in alignment with those needs? And so that's something that I'm really excited to focus on in this next phase of our work, as well as just really creating a good forum and platform to share best practices across public and private. I think there's been a lot of progress. There's also a lot to learn, and there's no need to reinvent the wheel. And so I think creating an opportunity for that level of sharing and borrowing of toolkits and best practices is always good. So we're looking forward to this next phase.
Excellent. Those are all great points. Matt, anything to add before we move on to the last section?
Just from the conversation around, who do we need in the private sector to be leading this? I think it's, I would sort of flip the framing a little bit and say, well, who in the private sector is looking to get ahead? Those are the people who are going to be leading us. There is a large business reason, a sort of imperative to embrace some of these strategies. If you want a agile workforce that you're able to get the most out of, if you're looking to boost retention, if you want to be able to kind of hire for those roles of the future that are just kind of emerging in the workforce, so you can't really rely on somebody having a decade of experience in these various areas that are emerging, it's kind of imperative to figure out, okay, well, what's the skill adjacency that exists in the labor market today that I could hire somebody with those skills and will be really successful in this kind of emerging role that we've identified. So it's less that kind of we collectively, as part of this skill-based movement, need a leader and a champion. It's that, like, the businesses who embrace this will be the ones who want to get ahead, and they'll naturally pull everyone forward, I think.
Thank you, Matt. All right, the last set of questions, and we've also got some questions from the audience that I think we'll have time for as well. There's a huge amount of questions around measuring and validating skills validation. So questions like, Do you have any insights specifically related to that? I love the question. The second question is, what does skills-based hiring look like in the age of AI? Who will authenticate or validate skills and skills definitions? Matt, in your initial conversation responses on the higher ed side, you touched on the skills validation piece and the role that higher ed plays. But I want to hand it up to you first to kind of set the stage for this conversation around measuring and validating skills.
Yeah, absolutely. That's one of the most challenging pieces here. If we're going to be removing something that had traditionally stood in as a proxy for skill maturity and development, we need a new mechanism to validate skills. And I think that there are a lot of really tried and true mechanisms in hiring already, right? Asking for a portfolio of work, incorporating some kind of reflection on past experiences into interview questions or as a freestanding response in to sort of to go alongside something like a resume drop, where people can really kind of expound on those experiences. As you broaden the talent pipeline, the pool of people that are available to fill these, available to sort of submit a resume because you've maybe removed a degree requirement. This does create all of a sudden this huge big stack of resumes and maybe responses to go through. And I think that's an area where AI can be very helpful. I think there are some tools that are kind of already coming on the market to help structure some of this hiring, some of these kind of like hiring needs with AI tools. One thing that I'll kind of reinforce here is there's a tendency, or there's a threat, I guess, to focus so much on skills that we kind of forget the fact that these skills are like bundled up in people. And we do want like a humanistic and empathetic talent acquisition and talent management process. In fact, by leaning into skills, I hope that it's kind of more humanistic than other kind of stepwise binary ways of demonstrating value in the labor market. And by using certain kind of AI tools too quickly or without making sure that they kind of really work in the context of a resume review or a response review, you risk providing kind of a bad experience to job seekers and people who are in the market. And I think there's kind of a lot of that sentiment among job seekers today, where people are getting, ghosted more often in the hiring process, and they really don't feel like they have kind of a relationship with the places that they're applying. And so I really want to, encourage sensible and responsible implementation of some of these AI tools, and really kind of maybe use some of these AI time-saving mechanisms as a way to reinvest in that kind of human and empathetic emphasis as you're kind of doing as on the employer side as you're hiring. But I do think that these AI tools are very helpful for kind of validating, reviewing responses, validating skills, and that sort of thing.
Thank you. Amanda, Satish, I'd love your thoughts on this. Specifically, the last question here on the page is around durable skills. And Satish, you mentioned these foundational skills a number of times as well. And specifically the question of like, how do you see those skills being credentialed or recognized as well? I think that's a really good question. So I want to throw that out here as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's imperative. And I think what we've seen, especially as degree requirements have dropped and we're opening that funnel, I think, yes, degrees were a proxy for technical skills, but also a lot of assumptions and proxies for those durable skills as well. And so growth mindset, learning mindset, communication. And so in lieu of those, we do have to think about how can we assess and validate for that in the hiring process, whether that's through specific interview styled questions for like behavioral based interview, tell me about a time when, or there are platforms and emerging technology that's leveraging AI that's also working to assess durable skills. And more importantly, if there's a lack of a certain durable skill that's really required for a role. Let's think about, the role of like hospice workers and having to deliver, news to a family. The durable skills are really important for that kind of role. And so one, like how can we leverage technology and both like our interview assessments to measure that and assess for that, but also then if we have someone who that's their dream role, that's their desired pathway, how do we help them enhance through technology and through training to build that skill set? And so I am seeing that happen with some of our employers in our states to really think and explore the opportunities around durable. But I see this is going to continue. The importance of this is only going to continue. And so I'm excited to have this as a focus area in our next phase. And Amanda, feel free to chime in as well.
Yeah, I've lots of opinions, but what I want to signal here is something that we're learning about too, alongside our cohort, is that we have to figure out who is this important to, who is recognizing the proxy. So the employers, what's important to them? Because I think on the education and workforce side, we have a tendency to over credential. We say, okay, well, let's create, micro credentials for communication, for adaptability, for collaboration. Let's create these things. And if you create these signals that aren't accepted on the other side, then it's not worthwhile for the learner. Like the employer, they don't really lose out because they'll use the same things they used before. Education side can pat themselves on the back for creating new credentials. And then the learner worker is there in the middle being like, I have these things, but nobody cares about them in the package that they're in. They care about the skills, but the packages we put them in have made them unrecognizable to the place that they're going. So I think we really need to think about what's the right signal. And I'll say we need to base this off of what's being accepted now. And as we have talked to at lots of different forums with some partners who have different stakeholders across employers and workforce boards, the current signal that's seen as signaling durable skills is a work-based learning experience or a professional experience. So you've had another job that you were successful at, or as a student who's coming out of a training or an educational pathway, you had a work-based learning experience. You worked with another employer. And that signals to them, oh, okay, so you showed up to work. You interacted with a team. You worked on tasks, so some of the things that they're really thinking about as foundational, they see signaled by something like a professional or work-based learning experience. So we have to figure out if it's not that, if we're trying to package things in different ways, what's going to signal those types of skills in the same way that a work-based learning experience does? How does that translate over to what industry is looking for? Because I worry that if we try to credential all of these things, if we're not actively engaging with what a hiring process looks like and what is seen as valuable within that process, then we're going to create a bunch of supply and hope for the demand. With the learner worker being sort of caught in the middle. So just a few things to kind of tie the education side back in and the things that they need to be thinking about as they're thinking about a shift to skills, but then also that gap that still exists between our conversations and actual hiring decisions on the industry side.
Excellent, really great points. And just a quick plug as we get into some quite live Q&A, and we only have a few minutes, I realize. But I'm looking at Matt and his team have done some really awesome work at the state level around looking at industry recognized credentials and credentials of value work. And so Matt, myself, others would happy to share more about that and how we're using a data-based approach to that to that specific credentials of value conversation. Also around durable skills, America Succeeds has a really awesome durable skills framework that Lightcast MZ Burning Glass partnered and continues to partner with America Succeeds on that. So if you haven't seen the durable skills framework, highly recommend that as well. All right, so we have just a couple minutes. We've got a lot of different questions come in. Thank you all for the engagement today. Thank you to our great panelists as well. There's a couple more kind of just foundational skills-based hiring questions that have come in. I want to make this as rapid fire as possible. Amanda, I love this question. I wonder if you could just have some quick thoughts on how do you, the question from Noah is, how do you observe smart and well-meaning newcomers to skills-based hiring movement engage in redundant ways or with efforts that repeat lessons others have already learned? What advice would you include in a skills-based hiring welcome packet?
Oh man, that's such a good question. And now I will have to say, and there's elements of the skills-based hiring message out there that I still question. I think we are exploring this as an opportunity area for increasing the amount of people who can enter the workforce when barriers are removed. But we're balancing this with other like state priorities around attainment and things of that nature. So we're trying to see this as a piece of a large puzzle around addressing workforce needs, but also retaining people within key industries. NGA is approaching this as sort of where does this fit in the ecosystem of effort around creating strong regional workforces. And so certainly in a skills-based hiring welcome packet, it would be really a positioning of where this work lives. It's not the silver bullet to solve all of the economy's problems, but it's a set of strategies. And so I think that would a positioning element of this, and sort of like and the what's happening now. And I will say, while there's exciting things happening, sometimes the message and excitement is outpacing the effort. So sometimes we're getting real excited, but might be getting a little over our skis in some of these spaces. So I think data to sort of get people centered as to where we are now and what the opportunities are that still exist that are very exciting, but sort of the things that we're grappling with. And then also I would, and this is me not being a technology person, but I think there's a lot of noise around AI right now that I think we need to get a handle on about how it's going to affect hiring processes, how it's going to affect entry-level jobs, how we need to train people to be prepared in the workforce around AI. I think right now we're in an area of excitement around AI and a little bit of terror around how it might impact the workforce. But we've seen this with a lot of other, technology surges. And we got to get to the other side of this sort of excitement space. So I think it would be also framing around, look, it's great. If you come to me with an idea and you say AI is going to fix all these human problems, I'm probably not going to believe you. So I think we really need to bring some of these newcomers in a space that orients them to the reality of what some of this work is, but also harnesses some of that excitement to keep it going while we figure out how these things are going to shake out.
It's really well said, Amanda. Thank you very much. We're unfortunately at time. I know we could easily talk for another hour here. There is a quick poll, again, if you want to connect with Lightcast on applying a skills-based approach. I also want to send or just show this slide. If you want to look at our reports around the speed of skill change, the Rising Storm report around the demographic drought, or the Empowering Progress report that Lightcast and NGA partnered on, their QR codes are right there. We will be sending out the the slide deck and recording for anyone who wants to rewatch this or watch it for the first time. And I want to just say thank you to Amanda, Satis, for your partnership. It's been a real privilege. Excited for continued work. And Matt, thank you so much for being part of this discussion and adding the research and data rigor you have. With that, well, thank you all, and I'll close it up. If you have any questions, please let us know. We're excited to continue the conversation. Take care.
Thank you.